finders keepers. I put this here on purpose because I don't want to carry it. It's my $100 hide. So if someone would have found this before I reclaimed it, it would have been theirs, but that's not even the issue. The issue is that there's no one in town who buys something like this. This would be the mom and pop store on steroids if it were equal to what the insurance companies are in catastrophes, which leads me to believe what experimental is when considering the government's experimented on we the people before, and this was called MK Ultra, taking in test subjects and making them take dangerous chemicals, and illegal at that. And so the fact that we can't describe what pain is in a court of law or in the medical industry, or why I'm so sure about a carbon footprint being used as a rhetorical question, and in the end just meaning an unwanted group of people, is that the US government wanted to get rid of the Native Americans in the early days. They sent the army to kill all the bison to starve out the Native Americans. Now that hurt the Great Plains until this day, but that's not to mention a strategic plan that they actually did. Have you ever seen a screen hanging on the side of the road? Nothing says it's ghetto as when there's fire trucks and policemen at the corner 2 blocks behind it. What is dangerous is if a land is being used as a weapon. And how can this be done? Through authorities making measures that aren't real. An example that is real but is unable to name drop would be if an artifact is left inside of a house that's private, but then if someone buys the house with the artifact left inside of it, that artifact is now property of the new buyer. And so if you've got that artifact turned over to someone who would know more about it, like a journalist and a publisher, and then have it be the FBI storms into the journalist and the publisher before any accusations are made from that artifact, with a warrant saying that it has been stolen, and then seize 2,000 pieces with guns blazing, the FBI has successfully weaponized the land. And so this would be the same as exciting a field and then knowing predictions just by. So what's one way that you could be like an FBI agent without being one and do the same obstruction is if you've got a lot of money and then you invest it into something that is really dangerous. So dangerous that it would confuse the entire world if it got loose, and then being able to have the supply chain get broken, causing a recession, but then having enough money to live comfortably through a recession would be playing the odds of both ends. This is one way of weaponizing the land without being an FBI agent. And so when you're depreciating stuff and then reflating it, it's really dangerous because it's like creating a new number group in mathematics, even though currently no one's smart enough to make new number groups, or else there would have been one found by now. I ran into two problems. You have to hit the stripe of the concrete in order to have a chance at it having enough energy to backlash, because the cork of the ball would allow for that return. Secondly, I had to throw it higher than what I did so that the velocity I'm throwing it with doesn't push it upwards, but rather returns it reflection angle. So I aimed too low. It would have had to been a bit higher. The experiment then earlier, it could have been, there's no set amount of time if you're to have an abundance of throws, given the fact that in the LHC, the particle accelerator, they've been running that thing around in a circle, this merry-go-round, for 3 years non-stop, and probably more than that. And just imagine if I had golf balls throwing at that curb for 3 years non-stop. There would be golf balls all over the grass. And if my arm never got sore and I just threw it harder and harder, you know, like revving up the TEV, you would see that some odd throws would hit a ball in the grass and would ricochet off and come back as though it hit the curb that was top up. Or if I just waited and throwed until there was an earthquake so that it hit the bottom, but then the earthquake ricocheted it as if it were thrown at the top of the cement curve, would be twisting the data. And then to go and say with my results where I just picked the two odd ones and said, look at its return. And I'd say, here you can see the ball. And you look at the ball with the inspector and he'd say, yep, these balls were regulation. This is accurate data. You know, maybe I'm being conservative. It's just that we've got this, you know, things that outbreak and no one can handle it. Pulpurgating all this energy into colliders to make zoos of particles surface with actual entities, scramble backgrounds and separate them in order to make them appear. It's basically sticking toothpaste back in the bottle, and then when you successfully do it, well, now you've got a product to sell. And so the more that you keep advancing the science and then leaving open ends on stuff in the background, like the unknowing how water is absorbed into plant stems or leaves, a lightning bolts strike, you know, down to a science of those things. They're not completely known. And so the more that you can curtail these beasts that pop up from particle zoos, and then say, well, the science behind this would see that that's why that happened. And it allows for the because I told you so to be what science would be untrustworthy from, which isn't proper. We're part of a new science and a new experiment is making everything that didn't work be irreplaceable. So like when the batteries are going lower and the cars are breaking and there's a shortage of chips made for smart objects during the lockdown because the supply chain, when it's broken, it doesn't allow for just on time delivery. So in breaking that supply chain, they're able to give a "I told you so" and then induce new beast from the particle zoo, as this is what real is, while covering up all the things that they brushed over to get to the particle zoo entities.